Alrighty. Welcome back to Geeks and Grounds, a monthly game club where we play games and brew good conversations together. I'm your host, Jenny Wyndham.
And I'm Joel Thomas.
And just like Joel, I too have my cup of tasty beverage. Today is just tea. But I do have well, it's technically Sam's cup, but I'm holding up for our listening folks a mug that says, just walk out. If it sucks, hit the bricks. It's my favorite to share zone meme. So
I
cheers.
love this.
Mm-hmm.
Cheers. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
my cup's more of a terrazzo, like 1950s flooring style thing.
Yeah, you're like
Um,
actually classy.
think about like your middle school floors when you were walking down the hallway, and that is what like 90% of US schools are using for their middle schools. So
But yours is like the nice, cute, colorful, like it looks like cake sprinkles, whereas like my school was
like
just,
funfetti version of
yeah,
terrazzo.
exactly. Mine was not that cute.
Oh, very fun. Yeah, just sipping on some coffee tonight. I've been going hard on the hot drinks today. This is like my second
Hmm.
giant cup of coffee. I had
Dang.
some delicious tea with honey earlier. So yeah.
Dang. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So you are ready. For folks who are new or folks returning, this is our time to dive deeper, not only into the game that we're playing each month together, but also get a chance to talk about what else we're up to playing, consuming, and bring all of that in together in a nice, I don't know, soup pot of discussion. If we're
Get
going
in the
with more
soup,
food.
y'all.
But anyone who has already left a review on Apple or Spotify, I guess it's not really a review, it's more of like a rating system. But if you've taken the time to do that, thank you. Super appreciated. And we encourage you, if you've listened to a couple episodes, why not? Why not give us a little star rating in there? Um, I think that's it for intro stuff. Pastry case. It's pretty fascinating today because we were just talking about the game that we're going to be talking about today, Balatro. We played the demo during Steam Next Fest. I hyped it up last week. I was like, I cannot. This is my before bed game, before Final Fantasy came out. This is what
Mhm.
I was playing every evening. And there has been a little update with that. And so I wanted to read just a little bit of a Games Radar article that came out about, let's see, let me get the date because the 29th on Final Fantasy VII Day. It came out on the 29th. This is by Jordan Gerblick on Games Radar Plus, and he writes Balatro, the hot new roguelite card game of the moment, has been pulled from several digital storefronts after its age rating was changed due to perceived gambling concerns. In response, the publisher PlayStack Games says the ratings decision is unfounded and vows to fight back against the removal. Um,
What?
yeah, so this is very rare for something like this to happen, but this is not the first time that this has happened due to like a ratings change or concern of gambling. I wanted to highlight because this happened last year with an acquaintance of mine, Zalavier, his game Sunshine Shuffle, which was another game that he on TikTok kind of had this campaign where he was joking about how it's not teaching gambling to children because it's a card game. um, Someone apparently took it very seriously and they were like, is this actually going to teach our children gambling? And Sunshine Shuffle, say that 5 times fast, was actually removed for a time and I believe has been reinstated back onto the Switch store. But this has been a thing that's happened a couple of times in the past. So really, really interesting. Um, yeah, I
I
was
am
just fascinated.
flabbergasted by this.
What I think is most interesting, because it's one of those things where it's more of a rate, like it illuminated to me the need for transparency around rating systems
Mm,
and like who is making the decisions when, where, because that's such an abrupt thing. I was actually really shocked that it happened so quickly that they're
mm.
just like, actually, no, we're going to change the rating. It's like, what? How? Who? Why? It's really, really interesting.
This feels like that purity culture bullshit coming back in. Botanical idealism that America was founded on. My goodness, I can't believe this. Like, okay, for some context, uh, when you buy like a card deck, like bicycle card deck, at least in the 90s growing up, it always came with the rules for poker. Always.
Hmm.
It was just in the deck. as kids, we would at sleepovers, I mean, I was probably like 8 or 9, like,
Right.
playing poker with my friends. Now, we did not understand how gambling worked, we didn't understand the checks and the draws and the whatever
Right.
else, but, like, the rules of the game we were playing. So, the idea that this digital experience is teaching kids to gamble is wild to me. I can't believe this.
Yeah, it's well, and I think for anyone like at least when I was playing the game, I felt like it took some of like the language and some of the card patterns that you would want to capture in poker, but the game itself is not teaching gambling or encouraging gambling. And actually the developer even like said in a statement, that they're staunchly anti-gambling and they've taken a lot of care to try and make sure it doesn't feature any gambling sort of mechanics. um yeah, it's just been very interesting to see how quickly that changed and how suddenly, and the fact that like the developers were sort of taken blindsided a little bit by this decision. I'm curious like the process in which the ratings, because that's actually something I haven't done before personally, is like really submit for ratings and do all of that. That's not
Mm.
really in my purvey. And so seeing that, I was like, there has to have been some sort of notification process or something. I understand. And I guess it's like one of those things where I get it in terms of, yeah, I really don't like some of the gotcha mechanics that we can see in games, especially on mobile. I really don't like some of the pay to win structure,
Mhm.
and like that
Yep.
kind of folds in with a little bit of the gambling culture. I know as on Twitch, for example, and well, actually maybe not on Twitch. I know that on some streaming platforms, a lot of people will tune into like slot streams or like other
Mm.
gambling style streams. I'm like, I get it. That's not good. Uh, but it's really interesting that this was like this is not a game that I would consider that supports that really, mechanically even. I
It
don't know,
reminds
have you
me.
played much more of it other than the demo?
No, I
Okay.
haven't yet. I actually would we were talking because I thought I was downloading the Final Fantasy Rebirth, this week, and I didn't realize that I was hitting, like, a memory issue with my device.
Oh,
So I had to wait for, like, an extra 4 hours for the download. So
no.
I almost picked it up while I was waiting, but I took a nap instead, and that was probably the right choice for me for
Yeah,
this week.
probably.
I okay, so, let's just think through all the ways that this is total bullshit. Uh, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, there is the casino level where Sonic turns into a little ball and drops into a, what's the thing called where you pull the lever down and
Oh,
the,
like
like.
pachinko?
No, it's like the 3 you wanna get, like, 3 things in a row that match and it,
Oh,
like,
slot machine?
slot
Yeah.
machine, thank you. Good god. Was I learning to gamble because whenever I saw 3 Sonic faces, I got 50 rings, and so I'm gonna play it again?
Right.
No! This is like when people in the '80s were like, "Dungeons and Dragons is for worshiping Satan." And it's like, okay, there are demons in the game. That doesn't mean that you're worshiping demons in real life. That's
Yeah.
bonkers. I can't get over it. Like, oh, this makes me so I know this is like a sensitive thing for me in particular, but this makes me incredibly angry.
Yeah, it's just I don't know, it's just really shocking to me, but again, considering the fact that this happened a very similar situation happened with Sunshine Shuffle, I'm like, increasing the actual transparency around this process is much needed, and like who is playing the games, who's making these decisions, because I think
Mhm.
it's one of those things where honestly if you've just seen screenshots of Balatro, I could see perhaps like, oh, you see these hands, you see the numbers, like did
That's
someone
it
just see the
exactly.
screenshots of this and
That's
not
it
actually play
exactly.
it? Because
It's the same
even
it's sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, I was gonna say even the developer said, like, the risk reward mechanics and, like, the RNG is not inherent to gambling. Those are core mechanics to the genre of, like, the card game and the roguelites and roguelike
Mhm.
mechanics that he's trying to employ in the game itself. It's not
Mhm.
encouraging gambling. There are different difference there.
Good god. I like, this is parents going and advocating for book bans for books that they know nothing about.
Right.
This is, my parents forcing us to get rid of our Yu-Gi-Oh cards because there are demons on them. Like, it is just people who are so far outside of what the actual thing is that they are like boycotting or protesting, that are
Right.
like, oh, I can use this as like a cultural identifier to show that like I'm in my in group, I am
Mhm.
doing the right thing. And it just, oh, it just makes me so very angry.
Yeah, so I'm really hoping that they can figure out, sort this out and get the game back on the shop. Admittedly, looking at the Steam reviews, this is actually one of the highest rated games of 2024 so far. Overwhelmingly positive on Steam, has thousands of reviews, which is incredible for an indie. Like seeing an indie
Hmm.
of this like sort of size. I don't know the technical size of the team, but it seems quite small. And maybe
Hmm.
like a solo situation. The fact that this small team has had such a huge success is awesome. I wonder if perhaps some of that additional success is from maybe some of this. I hope it gets fixed because that's still not great for anyone who wants to try the game on the Switch or other platforms, but it's still on Steam for anyone listening who would like to give it a shot. But yeah, it was just some interesting news to kick off the weekend before we started playing Final Fantasy.
Let's shift to the best thing that happened. One of the best things that happened
Oh
to me
yeah.
this week.
Yeah.
But because I just a little personal news. A lot of good things happened to me this week. It was my birthday,
Yeah.
and
Happy
uh
birthday.
thank you. I just so that everyone knows what a great friend Jenny is
Oh my
and
god.
why you should wish that she was your friend. I mean, you're listening to this, so you probably already know. But just in case you don't, I took the afternoon off because on my birthday, because I wanted to go for a hike, and then we're gonna do like a dance class together, and then we're gonna meet up with our partners and do K barbecue. We had this whole thing laid out.
Yep.
Jenny comes, she picks me up, she turns off my block. We're about 2 blocks from my house, and there is a dog on the side of the road, full size. It looks scared. Its tail's between its
It's
legs.
so cute.
And, like, without even, like, having to talk about it, Jenny's like, "Yeah, we're gonna pull over and see what we can do here." So we stop, and we call the dog over, and it is the friendliest dog. It comes right up to us. She's, like, this beautiful brown with, like, black tiger stripe pattern, like, pit
Mhm.
bull of some kind. So smiley, so nice. Gets into the car, we start knocking on doors. Eventually, we take the dog back to my house, and we're like, what are we doing here? What is the plan? And what we ended up doing was printing off some flyers, just putting them around the block. We went and got some coffee. We went and got a little leash or a lead, depending on where you're from. And we're like, well, we have things. So there's like a very nice, like, no kill shelter nearby that will, take care of
Mhm.
dogs that are in the situation. We're like 2 miles from my house, probably on the way to the shelter, when the owner gives us a call and is like, "You have my
Yay.
dog." And just a few reasons why this is amazing. First of all, we didn't do the hike. We still did our dance class and our K barbecue. Jenny just like made a whole day of this and was like, "Yeah, like we're scrapping the original plan. We're gonna do this amazing thing together." And we were heroes for the day. We like reunited this dog with its owner.
Yeah.
uh, Additionally, Jenny has like ESP or something. She was like, "Oh, this dog has like a Sadie energy to me. Maybe we should call her Sadie while we're waiting." And then when we get the text, it's like, "Oh, she responds to Daisy," which is just switching the S and the D, y'all.
I was
Like,
so close.
how does she do it? We don't know. We don't know. But like all that, like the very fun things aside, this was also going to be my first birthday since my dog passed last spring. And so having a whole day, like, or whole afternoon with this dog, it just felt like one of those like
Oh,
universe affirming moments. It was so good. And there's a bevy of other things that we did for fun this week, but that was definitely like just one of the absolute best moments for me. And so
oh,
Jenny is the reason we facilitated and got to have that. So thanks,
shucks.
girl.
Thank you. That was a super wonderful day. The whole day was fun, even though it was not what we originally planned. Yeah, dog owners for a day, heroes for the day. That was blast. Um, aw, I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Uh, so that was just one of many good things that happened this week as we got to the lead up for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Oh my god! In case y'all didn't know, in case you haven't listened to any other podcast this year, uh, I'm just a little bit excited about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. In fact, I was so excited, I took the week off to, like, both rest from my game launches earlier in the month, but also to prep and be ready to just, like, turn off the world and play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and ooh, it did not disappoint for me. How are you feeling about it? Because I think I'm a little bit further along than you are.
You definitely are. So we will avoid spoilers, but we're going to just
Yes.
say, some things that we're excited about and things that, whatever. We'll just some general thoughts.
Yep.
I'm about 10 hours in and I'm loving it. I am very confused by the opening cinematic. I am addicted to the in-game card game that you get to play. Somehow the game has me invested in side quests, which almost never happens to me. Like I am I am just hooked. I'm absolutely hooked. Like what are you going through right now? What's been happening for you?
Oh my gosh. Just a quick so, I guess, are you still in the Grasslands region? Okay.
Yes,
Cool,
still in
cool,
the
cool, cool.
grasslands. I'm trying to level up. One of the things that I am frustrated by was like all of the work you do to like level your characters up in the other games and it doesn't
Oh,
carry over to this one. And it's like
yeah.
I'm all weak again, which is how I eventually started feeling about the Assassin's Creed genre. Was like, okay,
Mhm.
how do we take these like very strong people and make them weak at the beginning of the game again? I
Right.
don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I am having an amazing time playing this game. I am for folks who know the sort of geography of the original version, I'm in the Costa del Sol area. I have cruised my way through
Wow.
the game. I am really proud. I've decided for whatever reason I have it in my head. I'm like, I'm gonna 100% every area in this game. So I have already 100%ed grasslands and the Junon areas. Uh, I will
Wow.
say this I've played a lot. God, do I want to say the hour count? Okay, yes, fine. I have played 33 hours in the last 3 days of owning the game, which is not my norm. I do not like usually I'm someone who will play for like 2 or 3 hours tops every like evening or even every other evening. I don't play games every single day. And the fact that this game has me so hooked that I'm like, I don't want to stop playing. I go to bed
Mm,
at night and I'm like, the last thing I want to do is play Final Fantasy VII.
mhm,
When I wake up in the
mhm.
morning, I went on my run today and then I was like, oh, I've got time before we go to the gym. Let me just boot up Final Fantasy VII and see what other side quests I can get done. Um, it's so good. I think it is for the folks who are uncertain, who are like diehard fans of the franchise and of Seven in particular. I think you will likely enjoy it, but do be warned that this is a very side quest heavy Final Fantasy and a very mini games heavy Final Fantasy, which has been really interesting. I found it really fun.
I
Um,
was gonna ask you about this. So,
yeah,
let's hang out on the mini games for a bit here because
yes,
I have been shocked by how many different mini game experiences there are in
yeah.
this. And so is that not similar to any of the originals or the
No,
original?
what's really interesting is I think part of it may be sort of the what happens, I think, when you get into open world style games where you
Mm,
need to fill the time. And so
mhm,
you in a lot of open world games, you get that with side quests and you get that with mini games. What I love about this is that all of the mini games are based off of the mini games that you encounter with like Queen's Blood being the exception because that was not a thing in the original Final Fantasy. But the other mini games are based off of little mini game moments that you had in the original. So even
mm.
though it's a lot, and I could see folks being like, "Oh, this feels like filler. I don't really like this." I'm just so happy to be in the world, and I'm so happy that it fits the narrative and it fits what I feel like is within the universe that I don't care. I'm like, yeah, give me all the side quests, give me all the mini games. I just am enjoying my time in these regions because it's also so freaking
It
beautiful.
is gorgeous.
Oh my god.
It's like I stop sometimes and I just like look around the environment. I
Yeah.
I cannot, the textures, the land masses, like
Mhm.
the water looks a little weird to me, I'll just to be honest. But otherwise, like I'm just blown away by the artistry in this game.
Yeah. It's great, and, again, we won't get into spoilers. There's, like, a couple of small details, I think specifically with Barrett, where I'm just like, "Ah." I feel like, Barrett's always the character that's kind of like, "Ooh, why you got so close," and I think I still love Barrett as a character overall, but I think the way that some of the things I wish they gave to Barrett, I'm like, "Ah,
Mm,
ugh." But, that's a small detail, I think, and then the other small detail that I'm like, "What's even happening?" Because in the prologue, there is some stuff that they show that does not make sense.
yeah,
Like, in that there's the
that
very
opening
first
cinematic.
10-minute cinematic, and I still have no idea because they kind of show the cinematic and then they start you into the game, and you're just left like, "Excuse me? What does this mean?" And I have
Yeah.
theories, but I'm not gonna say them quite yet, but, yeah, the game does take a long time because I feel like we haven't touched on any of that really, um, and maybe smidge, tiny little amounts, but
You're
nothing
30 hours in
substantial.
and they haven't touched on it yet.
And just, like, the smallest amounts they've maybe hinted
Interesting.
at things, but yeah.
I have been seeing online rumors that's like, if you were confused by the intro, you should have played Crisis Core. And I was like, God damn it! Like, I I know I should have, but
Yeah,
come on.
I feel like because I have not played Crisis Core either, and so I feel I'm really curious to know what I'm confused by that maybe could be solved by Crisis Core and what isn't.
Hmm.
Because I feel like
Hmm.
even though I've never played, I have a general understanding of what Crisis Core is narratively in this universe,
Hmm.
and I'm still like, "No, there's some stuff that does not line up," and I'm very, very
Yeah,
confused in a good way. I like this kind of confusion.
it's one of those things where what's really odd about it. Like, let's just talk about like this opening cinematic doesn't match with how the last game ended. Like what you
Yes.
experience is just like, where is this coming from within the timeline that I have
Mhm.
experienced? It doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
And it's like, movies will do that sometimes where they take you to like the climactic
Right.
event at the very beginning and they stop and like show you how we got there. But that works in movies really well because movies are 2 hours long. A game that's like, 80 plus hours long, it's like,
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see how they execute, like, keeping that front of mind and making
Mhm.
there be, like, a meaningful payoff for it.
Yeah. There's other elements, like, while I feel like they haven't touched anything of the beginning prologue, throughout the game thus far, what they've done a really good job of is, bringing us more into Cloud's mind and sowing some of the seeds of doubt, which
Mm,
I think, wasn't as apparent or really a thing in the first game, but has become a thing in the second install or the second version iteration of it. I'm very excited. I'm hoping that it's worth the payoff. I feel like it will be. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but so far I'm just having a blast.
there were some moments, like, even early on in the game, like you mentioned, the kind of self-doubt thing,
Right.
that, like, as the player, like, the characters will throw out, like, one line of dialogue, and you're like, "What? Like, I can't what do you mean?" Like,
Yeah.
there's something about how they've done this, like, because maybe it's because like you're questioning your own memory a little bit as a player because you're like,
Mhm.
wait, this doesn't match how the last game ended. What's going on here? Like
Yeah.
maybe there's something to that. I don't know, but
Right.
it's they have somehow gotten me doubting myself and my memory of things, which
Yeah.
granted is not hard to do, but
But it works, I think, really well in at least what I know from the original and where
mm,
that story goes. And so I'm here. I'm just gonna trust the process and enjoy my time and enjoy the ride. It's just been so much fun. I know that for folks who are listening, we're doing a lot of talking around the game. So if you're not
on
playing it,
purpose.
you're probably like, "Oh my gosh, this is like not telling me anything." So maybe during either the hangout or at some point we'll do like a special spoiler like edition of some sort, but
we've always said that we wanted to figure out how we could talk about a longer game on Geeks and Grounds,
Right.
so maybe we can find a way to do that here in
Yeah.
our pastry case. Like, we're not gonna tell you anything specific, but we are gonna tell you that we're playing it and how we're feeling about it.
Right, or maybe and again, it's like maybe we have just, like, a special episode that's like, "You know what? It's not an indie, it's not a short game. It's just the long game that we were all playing kind of at the same time. We can just do a deep dive fun edition
Yeah.
out there someday."
Maybe one of
We'll
those,
see.
like, 5-week months or something like that.
Yeah.
5 Saturday months or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah,
Um
I was also thinking, like, one of the things that's been really interesting about the game is how in an open world setting, um, they indicate to you what bosses you can fight and which ones you cannot. There were moments playing this that felt almost like a Souls game where I was like, "Oh, I can just trot up and like get absolutely whomped by a monster that's just chilling in the in the area,
Yeah.
but I am nowhere near strong enough to play yet." They have it's been interesting because sometimes they will tell you like almost like recommended level for like
Mhm.
where you should be, and those battles, if you're at the recommended level or with even like 2 levels past that,
Mhm.
they're challenging. Like, there are some challenging, like, mini bosses and things throughout this game. So,
Yeah.
um, I mentioned last time that, like, the speed of the combat is a little much for me sometimes, and I still
Mhm.
kind of feel that way, but I definitely I'm not getting good, but I am getting better.
Yeah, that's really it's so interesting because you are much more proficient at Souls likes, than I am, like, in sort of the Dark Souls, Elden Ring genre. I have not found success in that. I have found, like, stubbornness and determination and,
Yeah.
scraping by just, like, barely.
Mhm.
But it's interesting because I feel like this battle system for me has actually it just, like, fits my brain really well, and I found that this is, like, so smooth. And so,
Oh,
like, not
nice.
easy, but, easy enough in the sense that I can strategize, and I've actually found my playthrough has gone, like, the other way where I'll, like, be maybe an level at or under, like, any
Mhm.
recommended, and I've, like, found success there. So it's interesting because I feel like you're a combat person compared to me usually, so that's kind of cool. Um
I so one other thing, how long did it take you to figure out how to change your party members? And did you have to look it up? Because
I
it
did
took
not
me hours and I had to look it up.
I did not have to look it up, but it did take me, like, a longer than I feel like it should have. Because I originally went to there's, like, a party
It says party.
yeah, there's a party section of the menu, but that's not where you change your party.
Can't do
It's
it there.
a combat like, combat setup or combat
Yeah,
something.
something like that.
Yeah, that was weird.
I just
So
like I kept thinking I was like, well, I really want to play with like Tifa and Aerith as my main two people throughout this
Mhm.
game, but it won't let me change out of my starting party, and I kept thinking, like, there must be some in-game thing happening here that is the reason why,
Right.
and there is not. It's just a weird menu layout thing.
Yeah, I think the menu has it's interesting because it's not the most I know where things are now, but it was not intuitive for me. Like, I
Yeah.
had to keep sort of clicking and then going back and clicking and going back for the first couple hours
Yeah.
because I was just like, I don't really understand, the order in which they're putting things in this menu,
Mhm,
especially,
mhm.
but, um
Oh, what about, because you just played the remake, right before hopping into this, and I
Mhm,
couldn't remember if this was new to this game. I feel like there's so many new mechanics in this
right.
game. Was there a character, like, skill the folios, like, skill leveling in remake?
No, and that's actually what's tripping up maybe me the most, is they have a very different system. So in the remake, you just had, like, your character levels, like, normal sort of
Mhm,
experience, you gain a
mhm.
level, and then your weapon was the thing that you would, like, allocate points to. Here, you have both the equivalent of, like, character skill points that you're allocating, as well as, weapon sort of, I don't know, perks slash
Yeah.
a attacks, I guess, special attacks based on each weapon. And you're not actually leveling each weapon, sort of hand crafting it. You're leveling the
Mhm.
character. So that is different. Um, I really wish like the folios that they have, the art for those folios in game, I wish I was a crafty person who could make replicas of those folios.
They're
Someone's
gorgeous.
gonna do it, and it's gonna be amazing.
If you find the Etsy link for
Oh my
these
gosh.
folios, send it over.
Right.
I do hate that you cannot just do that wherever you are in the world. You have to go to like a special place.
Yeah,
Like, oh, you leveled up, and it's going to be an hour before you're back at a place where you
right.
can do the actually like use those skill points, which is just like,
Mhm.
why have you made this needlessly complex?
Well, and I found and maybe I would love to hear as you progress because I don't know if I'm just doing something wrong or maybe I'm just not in an area where you get a lot of SP, which is the skill points for your characters. But I'm finding that I am like using the folios very rarely anyways because I don't have enough
Mm,
SP to like go in the sphere grid and sort of like it kind of looks like Final Fantasy X sphere grid honestly, which I love.
mm.
But yeah, I haven't used it in a decent amount of time, I feel like and I don't know if I'm just not getting SP or not doing something right. So I'm a little concerned there, but
Oh, maybe I have this wrong. So I assumed that you got SP like 5 points with every level. And then at the beginning of your folio, almost all those unique skills cost 5 points. So like
right.
every level, you're getting a new skill. And now I've just filled up all my 5 point skills. So every new skill now costs 10 points. So it's like,
Yes.
I'm assuming that means I have to get 2 levels to get a 5 + 5 = 10 skill points.
That
Is
might be
Yeah.
it. I'm not sure. Because I haven't because I'm at level, like, 30 now, and I feel
God
like
damn.
I don't know, I should actually check and see because maybe I'm further along and it just feels like I haven't gone as far, but when I look back, I'm like, "Oh, I'm because I know I've unlocked at least sort of level 4 of the folios,
Okay.
so maybe I am on track, and I'm just, like, wanting more of that dopamine rush of, like, unlocking things.
That is exactly so. It reminds me like Skyrim. I think has still like one of my favorite skill tree
Mhm.
progression mechanics. I love the constellations. I love that you can see what you're working towards. I love that the percentages are big enough that they make sense to me to care about. So it's
Mhm.
like 25% reduction in magic use, 50% reduction in magic use, 75, 100%. It's like, I know why I'm putting my skill points into that
Right.
percentage reduction when it's like 25% increments.
Mhm.
Starting off and like the opening of this is like 3% additional damage for this type of attack. And it's just
Yeah.
like, I mean, I'm
What
gonna
does that
get it
mean?
because I have the skill points for it, but like I cannot fathom that as a
Yeah.
player, what that means.
Yep, I completely agree. I'm just kinda like, "It sounds good, I guess.
Yeah.
I can
You know,
afford it."
Griffin McElroy has a lot. He's talked about this a lot. Like the
Mm,
need for like the best games at this are the ones that have abstracted away from percentages that you're not keeping track of individual percentage points for your skill growth,
mhm.
but you've abstracted it to like I think the materia actually kind of do this as they level up, but it's like
Yes.
kind of a good, better, best. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, I generally understand what that means, more so than I can like ticky tack percentages. I don't know.
Yeah, I have never found myself I think this is why a lot of character, like, especially, more traditional kind of like old school RPGs with their like really minute point allocations and
Hmm.
percentage counts, I've never gravitated to because I'm like, I don't do math. I don't care. I just want to play a game and like beat things up with big
Yeah.
numbers. And so I completely agree. I love the materia system because of how straightforward it is. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I need
Totally.
this many points to be at a level 1 materia. I need this many
Hmm.
points and then I
Hmm.
can do the second level spell and we're all good, you know. And it's just so clear. Yeah, and I feel like the character customization through the folios and the SP in Final Fantasy VII is less clear to me, but that's okay because again, I'm still having such a good time. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna fill out the sheet and eventually something good will happen. I'm sure.
You have just reminded me of something that does annoy me about this game, and
Mhm.
that is the like AI or whatever for your party members to attack. Like I don't feel like they do enough. Like, you know how fast and powerful your attacks are when you're playing as any given character. So the
Mhm.
fact that they're just like in my party chilling and not very often doing attacks, it's like, well, if you get the auto, materia use and link it
Mhm.
to a spell ball or whatever, then they will cast that without you having to do anything. And if
Yeah.
you get the auto unique use materia, they'll use that and they'll use their unique skill without you having to do it. And it's like, why do I have to give up materia slots to get the people to do the thing that they should just be doing? That bothers me a great deal.
That's so see, and maybe it's also the way that I play because I am constantly switching characters. I'm like in battle, I'm never not doing an attack, and I'm constantly switching characters to build up their meter just quickly. And
Mm.
I think this goes into the whole like management sim game where I'm like, I love the multitask management games. And to me, every battle is that. I'm like, okay, we've got, it's like I'm in a kitchen and I've got
Jenny's over
someone
here playing Overcooked by herself.
basically. And I'm like, that's what the battles kind of remind me of and why I love them so much because it's less a I don't know, it's less a, "Hey, let's, like, attack this thing," and I'm like, "Okay, what are the ways that I can, like, bounce everyone's actions off of one another to, like, make the perfect, hamburger?" Something like that.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'll be honest, like, I'm just getting to the point where I'm more comfortable switching between characters, and it has made a huge
Mm,
difference in how
mhm.
difficult the battles are. So, I guess that would be like a good piece of advice for someone that is spoiler free, which is
Right.
get comfortable switching between characters using the D-pad. Like, that's the way that they
Yes.
do it. So,
Any last, like, first impressions from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth?
um, every character is just so goddamn cute.
Oh
Just
my
such a
gosh.
bunch of cuties, and I want to be their friends.
It's honestly like, I guess it's not really spoilers because I think if you've played the original game, it's more of the location and the vibe. But be getting to Costa del Sol, having our beach episode day, essentially. I'm just like, it was so much fun. And I will say, because this was in a trailer, so hopefully no one's considering it. You get like it's basically a Segway, but they call them wheelies because I guess
Mm.
Segway is, probably trademarked in some way. Just riding around on my wheelie around this coastal town. Sam was laughing, my partner Sam, he was laughing so hard because he was just like, "You're just doing old person vacation simulator, just riding around on your Segway." I'm like, "Yeah, I love it."
Oh
It's
my
amazing.
god, that's
So I spent
hilarious.
a couple hours just exploring the city of Costa del Sol, and being on my wheelie, and yeah, I had a great time. So
How'd you do on the shuffleboard minigame?
You mean Queen's Blood? Oh, the shuffleboard. I'll
For
have you
your
know
old,
I'm
old person sim.
very good at shuffleboard, which I guess maybe is
Oh,
proving your point.
interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, I'm quite good at shuffleboard. I will say Queen's Blood, we have not talked about that. It's the card game embedded within this Final Fantasy. I love a good card game in a game. Like Triple Triad is still one of my absolute favorite card games ever, and that was from Final Fantasy VIII.
Hmm.
Uh, Queen's Blood, I want it to be a real game. I would not be surprised if eventually they made it into a real game because it's so good. Oh
It's
my gosh.
good. It's so good. And it's like you can tell when it's like, oh, I made a bad strategic move
Yeah.
versus, oh, I just didn't have the luck of the draw if I would have gotten this other card. Because I
Mhm.
think you're only managing what, like 15 cards at a time for any given game, something like that.
Yeah, max. Because yeah, there's only 15. Yes, your deck can only be 15 cards. No more, no less is what the game tells you in the tutorial. And yeah, you basically the premise of the game is you have a 3 by 5 mat. You're placing down cards on your side of the mat. You are on the left, your opponent's on the right. And basically, you're trying to claim as many of those spaces with as many points in each horizontal lane as possible.
Hmm.
It's so straightforward, and then when you get into the strategy, it can get really fascinating, because each card some cards have abilities that
Hmm.
either boost or hinder both you and your opponent, so it just gets really fun. Oh,
I'm super into it. I think the only time that I've played an in-game card game before this was Witcher 3.
Ah.
And I did not understand the card game in Witcher 3, so I did very bad all the time. Just so everyone knows, Witcher 3 is one of the very few fantasy RPGs that I just simply could not do. Like, I couldn't understand how to make potions, so I couldn't figure out how to heal myself, so I could not progress in that story. And it's like, when anytime I went to Google and I was trying to like look up how to make potion Witcher 3 or like how to heal Witcher 3, it's like nothing in Google that came up was the thing to help me answer that question, because maybe it's just like so basic that like no one has gotten on and like asked that question to Reddit or whatever. But no, that this is great. It's a great card game. I'm super
Mhm.
into it. It's just the right amount of strategy, just the right amount of luck. I also would totally play this game in real life.
Yeah. I can't wait till Queen's Blood tables and mats come out in real life and we can actually get some tournaments going.
Hmm.
All right. So, to close out the pastry case, some notable indie releases for this week. We have got Snufkin Melody of Moomin Valley coming out on March 7th. This is so cute. Snufkin is a game that was announced, gosh, I don't know when. But actually, let me get it's developed by Hyper Games and published by Raw Fury. And basically, Snufkin it's a musical adventure about restoring harmony and balance to Moomin Valley. And if you're a fan of this IP, I think this is going to be one that definitely you'll want. And it's got this very storybook feel to the art, which I am very
Hmm.
excited to dive into. Again, probably not in any recent weeks, to be honest, because I'm going to be in Final Fantasy probably for the better part of March, but it looks really, really cute. Yeah.
I as soon as I saw this in the notes, I took a picture and sent it to my partner because she loves Moomin stuff. Like when we were in
Yeah.
Japan last fall, it was anytime we saw any Moomin anything, we
Mhm.
had to stop. We had to look at it. Like she sometimes will like read me little chapters from the Moomin books as we're going
Oh.
to bed. It's like a very sweet thing. And I'll be honest, it's one of the few IPs that I don't fully get. Like I feel like I'm missing something, but
Mhm.
not because in like not in a disrespectful way, just in like a
Right.
it's I don't fully get it.
Yeah.
And I think there's just like a maybe if I had read it as a kid or something and I had that, like
Yeah.
I would feel a little bit more.
Yeah. And then the next release that's coming out on March 8th is Summer House. I'm actually very excited for this one. This is a sandboxy, tiny building game. And it's just about creating beautiful lived in houses or complexes and sceneries. And it's just all about what can you create with the assets and tools that they provide you. And I am a sucker. Like Sims building mode was like my favorite part of The Sims, really. So this is basically for anyone who just loves to create very picturesque, very like lo-fi, almost PlayStation 1 style graphic environments. This is
Oh,
probably something you
fun.
would want to check out. It looks really, really good. And this is intentionally meant to be like a small game that's almost like a toy box situation. So don't go into this one thinking there's like a story or like combat or anything like that. It's just meant to be a small, relaxing, tiny building game, and I'm very
Just a little
excited for it.
tiny building game.
Yeah, it's gonna be so cute. So again, that was Summer House. All right. I think that's it for the pastry case. So we are on the first week of our new game for March. We're playing Gris, and this is by Nomada Studio and published by Devolver Digital. I am so stoked, especially because I know Joel is definitely an expert in this game, more so than I think. You
I
at least,
don't
because you have the art book, you've got the tattoo. I feel like you have a lot to like bring to this one this month. I'm very excited.
I'm just a huge fan. Like, I don't know if I am an expert. I'm just a huge fan of this game. Like, we're gonna get into the experiences, the themes of the game
Mhm.
today. I want to give a shout out to the people in the community that were talking about like kind of
Yeah.
guarding themselves to say like, hey, this game addresses topics like grief, and that's not something
Yeah.
I can really get into right now. Like, we really appreciate number one that you have made that call for yourselves, and
Mhm.
number two that you felt comfortable sharing it, because I think that type of engagement with the community is a really important element of what we're trying to do here. Is like
Right.
make sure that we're putting forward games with a certain degree of like, what's the informed consent, like that you
Right.
understand the topics that we're going to be talking about, and normalizing it to the point to say like, this one's not going to be for me because it's going to be
Yep.
like take me on this emotional journey is something we really truly appreciate. So thank you all for being honest about where you are with some of this stuff. That said, I am so excited to talk about Chris.
Yes. And again, this is also why when we create like the playthrough guides at the very beginning, like usually we don't go into too much detail on like plot of the game, but we
Hmm.
have that section on like content notes and content
Hmm.
warnings so that hopefully you can make those decisions for yourself. So, yeah, definitely if you're like, oh, where do I find that out? That's in the playthrough guide, which is always linked in the newsletter every week. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Gosh, where do we even begin with this? I think I would love to know if you can rewind yourself back in time, perhaps to when you first heard about Gris and sort of what were some of the things, if you recall, that originally drew you to this game?
The year was 2018. Maybe. I don't know. My friend Sasha, who also works in the gaming world, came over to my place to play the new Smash Brothers Ultimate. I think it was like release weekend for that. And
Mhm.
she was just like, hey, like, have you heard of this? Is this a game that you've experienced? I was like, no. She showed me the trailer for it. Y'all, if you ever want to convince someone that video games are more than Mario and more than just like
Mhm.
modern warfare or whatever, pull up the intro video or the demo for Gris. Like, it is absolutely stunning. It is the opening scene of the game.
Mhm.
Basically, you're watching this main character who's being held in this giant hand of crumbling stone, and she's singing, and there's watercolor, and it's vibrant, and the music is
Mhm.
incredible. And then something happens, and the hand starts to crumble, and she starts to fall. And that opening sequence and that um the video that I watched of that was just so immediately captivating that I was like, this is what I want from games. Like, this is the thing that I want from games. And
Right.
it instantly was, it connected with me visually, it connected
Mhm.
with me like auditorily. And then as I learned more about what the game was actually about, which we'll talk about, this is like, how did you figure out that this game was even touching on the topic of grief?
Mhm.
Something I'm curious to hear about.
Mhm.
But it was such a contemplative exploration of that. And so the more I played it, the more I was like, yeah, yeah, like it's, 5 hour, 6 hour game, something like that. Like, it's really short,
Mhm.
but it just connected with me very viscerally off the bat. And not a lot of games are able to do that. A lot of times games have to kind of build their way into my heart, and this was not one
Mhm.
of them. So I don't know. How about you, Jenny?
Interesting.
Because I know that you played with this a bit before, but it didn't quite have the staying power for you initially. So what were some of your experiences?
Yeah, well, I think it had the visual staying power and the artistic staying power. I think
Mm,
as we'll talk about it mechanically, I think there are some rougher spots that as a game it feels maybe not as great. I think some folks
mm,
in the community were also talking about that in the forums. Um, but I was the same where I saw the trailer and this sort of watercolor minimal art style was something that I immediately was attracted to. I think
mhm,
this is the kind of game that's just beautiful and you just you can't help but look at it because it is so striking, especially I think more so because a lot of games don't have this kind of texture, the
mm,
watercolor texture, the super clean, fine lines. Usually, games are much more bold and striking, or even in their pixel art, there's just a lot more visually happening. And this was such a
yeah.
clean art style while also being just kind of, I don't know, just striking in a lot of beautiful ways. So I think for me, the art absolutely stands on its own 2 feet. I think the music, once you play, and I heard the music in the trailer, I was like, this is going to be beautiful. You can tell it's going to be an emotional game. And
Hmm.
I'm a sucker for an emotional game. And I also thought this was really interesting because at the time, Devolver Digital was not a studio that I would have ever or publisher. Sorry, Devolver is a publisher, not a studio. Devolver Digital is not a publisher I ever would have picked to publish this game, because Devolver is, I mean, Devolver is
Interesting.
known for being a bit more edgy, a bit more like loud and like in your face. And so I thought it was really intriguing to me, just from like the marketing side of things, that what about this game made it stand out that Devolver really would step outside of their zone to publish this. It must have
Mm,
something special. And there's probably also the added element of Devolver wanting to broaden maybe their palette and their audience.
sure.
Um, but I knew this had to have something special because Devolver was stepping outside of its comfort zone, essentially, with its portfolio to publish it. So I think from the jump, I knew it was probably going to be something special. And it is. I think this is a beautiful game,
Mm.
and I'm excited to talk about it.
Did you know? I don't know if I've told you this. This game was how I learned about Devolver. I had never heard of it prior to this game.
And the marketing person in me is like, that's why it's honestly brilliant.
Because like so for me, when I hear Devolver, I think of games like Gris and like
Hmm.
any sort of like smaller, more artistic experiential game that they have made since. Like that's what I think of them as.
Yeah.
So it's just so funny that like I had never connected this dot until this very moment that like, oftentimes the game that you're introduced to a studio through or a publisher through becomes
Hmm.
what you think of when you think of that studio or publisher. And so for
Yeah.
me, it actually connect. Oh my god! Like I'm now thinking about all the other Devolver games that I've played over the years, and it's like, oh, Gris was like the exception. It is not the norm because it's like I walk into games from Devolver sometimes and I'm like expecting this one thing and it is not that. So
Yeah.
that's wow, that's so funny. Hmm.
Yeah. So we played, played is kind of okay. I will have to say a quick note and sort of, uh I guess, apologies on the lack of clarity, because I realized in the playthrough guide that I made for this month, I had put like stage one, stage two, stage three. And I was like, I should have put the colors. I thought about putting colors down and I didn't. And so folks in, the Discord server highlighted that. So I just wanted to verbally say thank you for that note. I have fixed the playthrough guide. And this week we played a very, very short section if you're going by each stage, each week by week. We just played the gray section of the game. I will say that while we are going to be keeping our topics like separated just for, I don't know, the sake of keeping the podcast going for the month, because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise we would have nothing really to talk about with Gris.
Mm-hmm.
Um, please play this how you best feel, because I think this is a game that is better served to be played in like one or two settings to get that full emotional impact. And if you're like really wishing you could have more to play, like play it again. I think there's a value that really truly, I think there's good value in replaying a game because you do notice more, you can get more out of it if you have the interest. But I wanted to also shout that out because I know that was, a note that I wrote down in my notebook to highlight. So that folks did mention that, and I wanted to say that I did fix it.
So we're playing through the gray. Shall we
Hmm.
talk through just like the events and like experiences of the gray first? Would that be a good way
Yeah.
to kick off?
Yeah. So what is really interesting is the game does not start gray. And I think that's already like one of those things. If we're getting into the nitty-gritty,
Get
the
into
gray
it.
does not begin at the start of the game. As you mentioned in the trailer and also in the opening cinematic, you see this beautiful sort of washed watercolor scene with all sorts of colors. You've got the blues and pinks and
Mm-hmm.
purples, and this sort of, this person is just being cupped in a seemingly like stone hand. She wakes up, perhaps from a slumber. You don't know how she got there. And she's singing. And as you said, the floor underneath her starts to crumble. She loses her voice. It's very like Little Mermaid style. I always
Mm-hmm.
think of like Ariel losing her voice,
Oh, you're
with
right. Yeah,
Ursula
totally.
in that moment, because she like taps her throat in a very similar way. And literally, like the floor literally crumbles from beneath her, and then that's when the gray hits. But I'd love to like pause this moment
Yeah.
because this imagery is so striking and beautiful and sad.
So the like I think a couple things to highlight would be one, this like floor that she's standing on is a hand, like a
Yes.
giant hand, right? and she's singing, and next to her is a stone face of a woman.
Mhm.
And and it's like, is she singing to the stone statue? Like, it's not super clear like what the
Right.
connection there is. But when she loses her voice, like, that's kind of when the hand crumbles and she
Right.
starts tumbling down. And for me, when I think about like a game that has obviously a very deep and rich lore that pretty intentionally does not go very deeply into explaining that lore,
Mhm.
Gris is up there, man. Like, it is so clear. It's like you're going through like ancient experience, like ancient cities, and you have these statues and things, and you're just like, well, who made these and
Mhm.
what did they make them for? And like, there are not many questions about the remains, I suppose is what I'll call it, that
Right.
you experience throughout the game. I'm guess I one of the things that I'm curious about is, as she's falling and we get this title sequence,
Mhm.
and then you land and the watercolor is gone, and the world around you is gray. Uh, at what point did you know that you were exploring themes of grief? If you can think back to the first time that you played it.
I think I think I actually knew it before I even started the game. Well,
Really?
because I read the Steam page and it said like this woman's going through a really
Oh.
tough journey, and so I was like, I mean, it stands to reason, just seeing some of the trailers I had seen, seeing some of
Mhm.
the store marketing and copy, that it kind of primed me to say, "Okay, this is probably some sort of, like, representation of grief in some way." Um, and I wish in some ways, and I think one person, I forget who said it, someone in Discord mentioned the same thing, where I think it was Singing Pigs who said, "I wish I knew it, I wish I hadn't known it was about grief,
Mm.
beforehand, because I wonder how I would have taken this information and taken this game in without that knowledge." Um, and I know I was like, "Oh, do I make that clear in the playthrough guide or not?" And I did, just because I wanted people to go in
The
informed.
content warning for
But,
sure. Yeah.
I also agree, I'm like, What would I have gotten out of this?" And I feel like I probably would have gotten it, but maybe perhaps closer to, like, the 2nd or 3rd stage, because at the very beginning, you're kind of just like, "Well, what's happened? I don't know."
So that is interesting because I did not know when I started playing.
Mhm.
Um, Basically, I'm gonna like fast forward. I don't think this is going to be a spoiler because we're gonna talk about this today. That
Yeah.
like essentially, as you're exploring, you can find statues, and
Yes.
once you find a given statue, it essentially like identifies itself as one of the 5 stages of grief.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was actually in like the red section, which we're playing for this next week. There's a point where it's actually kind of hard to miss the statue that's
Mhm.
in the red section. It's kind of like a default part of the experience.
Right.
And so I played the entire gray section, and this doesn't happen to like near the end of the red section that I found this statue that I was like, oh, because
Mhm.
it's like I think anger or something like that is
Yeah.
the second stage. And I saw that and I was like mind blown. Like one of those moments where it's like you're watching a movie and like the big twist happens and you're like, whoa, that
Yeah.
was me in that moment in the red section, stumbling across that statue and being like, I I had no idea that's what I was in for.
Mm.
And it made me go back and think about like the gray experience, the gray that we're going to talk about today, and be like, so much of that makes sense now that before I was just like, oh, why are we experiencing the mechanics like this? Like
Mhm.
that's interesting. And now it was like your mind switch, it like flips over and you're like, it all makes so much sense. They thought about this. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that was, if you don't know going in, that is the experience you might expect.
Yeah, and I think, I guess let's talk about some of these mechanics, because the first stage, even if you don't get the statue, I titled all of the weeks based on the stages, just to make it
Mm.
real clear. The first stage of grief, according to this process, which is, I think, a really interesting concept in general, just as this idea of the ways we experience grief. But the first process in the stage is denial. And so, yes.
I have to run to the restroom. I'm sorry. You
Oh,
said
yeah.
denial, and
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Oh my goodness, all that coffee and tea is catching up with me.
Yeah.
So you said denial.
Yeah. Yeah, so the first stage is denial. And I think mechanically, they do a really good job of capturing what that an element of denial feels like in
Mm,
terms of feeling. For me, it feels almost more like a disconnect. So, this idea of there's no color left in the world, you're sort of disconnected from that like sensory experience. You're disconnected from certain types of movement. I think even at the beginning, you sort of have to push her to walk, and she kind of
she'll
sits
take a
back
couple steps and then
down.
fall. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like movement is even a struggle, and so, like, that disconnect from body, and I
Mm,
thought the game did that really well, in
yeah.
terms of making you feel that element of separation and struggle to do the things that you feel like would be normal in a game setting, for example.
I think another one that, like, if you're just like hitting all the buttons on your controller, like seeing what will happen, there's one where she kind of like takes a breath in. She's like,
Mhm,
and what you will learn over time is that she's like learning to like sing again, that thing that she
mhm,
was doing at the opening of the game. And yeah, for me, it was like, again, one of those things where I'm playing through the gray world the first time thinking, oh, this is just the classic, like I'm starting a video game and they've taken away all of my things and I have to
mhm,
like relearn who I am.
mhm,
And then to your point though, like once I got to the red area and found like, oh wait, this is a reflection on grief, I was like, that's just brilliant. Like the
mhm,
way denial kind of takes away your own voice and agency over the situation because you can't even acknowledge that it's happened.
mhm,
The moving and collapsing back down, it just felt like such a poignant way to demonstrate that those early grief experiences, um, purely through mechanics. And
mhm.
I was blown away by that.
Yeah, I completely agree. What I also really appreciate and just wanted to note is in the environment, I wrote down that there are these sort of you see the barren rocks, you
Hmm.
see sort of a cloudless sky of gray, and you also see what seems to be sort of winding maybe tree trunks or representations of plants, but they're all like as if they've been burnt. Like there's no foliage, there's no signs of life other than the fact that there maybe once was a tree here or some sort of plant-like being. Which are we going to show your?
I got it. It's right here.
Yeah,
These kind of like again, just like the representation of like what once was there. And
yeah,
what's also interesting to me is the way over throughout the game they will use flora and fauna and
hmm,
what they look like and feel like. It's just I don't know. I think there's something there's something about it that goes almost more into a sci-fi story. Like, here's this strange planet where things just are a little different.
Mhm.
Like, that's kind of the feeling that I had when I was playing through some of this game, where it's just like, why does this tree look like that?
Mm.
Why does that rock look like that? Like, it's a
Mhm.
naturally forming rock as far as we know, and it looks weird. Why does
Yeah.
that creature move in that way? It's just like it's just those little weird idiosyncrasies that really, I don't know, it drew me in.
Yeah. And I want to say, because I look back at my notes and screenshots, and I think one detail that was not quite correct that I wanted to fix,
Mm.
we do not see the statue of the woman at the very beginning. So I think that it's
Oh,
narratively is different because I think from someone who maybe is going in and has never played and like or is unsure of what this story or process is, you don't know what is connected to that hand. And
oh,
I
you see
think
the hand, you don't see
yeah,
a
you
woman's
just see the
face.
hand. Yeah, because I was looking back at my screenshots because I was like, I think as we progress, we see more and more, which helps illuminate the why. Because I think my big question why, when I first was playing this, was okay, is this a story of her regaining her voice? Is again going back to the
Mm,
Ariel thing. Is this just about her like the world has lost color? She's lost her voice. Are we just trying to get our voice back? Like, what is that literal story
interesting.
that we're going through compared to what is this like maybe more metaphorical, symbolic story that we're going through. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the statues a bit, because you land, like, you fall from the hand, you land.
Mhm.
And I had never found the first statue before until this playthrough, because I went to the walkthrough guide. I was like, you
Yeah.
know what? I'm gonna do it this time. I'm gonna find that goddamn first statue. And the way that it works, like, the way that you find it is
Mhm.
you land when you can start moving. If you move to the right, you can take a couple steps at a time, and then you kind of collapse. Once you start being able to walk without collapsing, you move back to the left and you can
Mhm.
find the first statue.
Yes.
And that is the statue of denial. And
Yes.
and it's the shape of a woman, which will
Mhm.
be a consistent theme kind of throughout this, is that, like, there's statues of a woman or of different women. It's not really
Right.
specified or clarified. Um, but so I'm assuming you also, did you do the walkthrough guide? Did you?
I didn't do the walkthrough guide. I make a habit of going left in any side scrolling style game because that is just a thing where it's like I don't know. It's just one of those things. You always check under waterfalls. You always go left when the game tells you to go right. Like it's just a habit of mine.
That, yeah, it's the Korok mindset,
Yeah,
right? Where it's like,
exactly.
this is obviously the way I'm supposed to go. So I'm
Mhm.
gonna go the other way first because it should be short and there should be a reward.
Exactly. I'm like game knowledge, don't fail me. Like game tropes, let's go. But yeah, I think what's really interesting and as we see the different statues, they will be found in different positions and sort of
Mhm.
different arrangements. And this statue of denial is she's almost in what looks like sort of if you're familiar with like the yoga child's pose, but with one of her arms like stretched out.
Mhm.
Um And I don't know, like, how to really describe the feeling that it gave me, but it's like this just deep, like, I felt that statue, like, I felt that position, I felt that hopelessness, in denial, and I thought that was just a really powerful way to convey the feeling, like, was just this movement, or at least the position of this statue was just it didn't need words for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, again, the framing of these small moments, I think, paints such vivid, the imagery is, it paints feelings. I don't know how to
Mhm.
describe it, but it's just like, it's like when people put mood underneath a picture online, like,
Mhm.
mood. That is this game to a T. Like,
Yeah.
you see something and you're just like, hashtag mood, I guess.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It was interesting though because it got me thinking about the ways like I've experienced denial, and it's like
Mm,
there's there's the denial that's like hopelessness and sort of the incapacitation of your body and soul, but then there's also denial in the act of just staying normal, I guess, or, like, not even, like, sitting in that, but, like, just normalizing and just being like, "I'm just gonna pretend everything's fine." 'Cause in playing this game, I think with the Geeks and Grounds way is we're probably hopefully going to connect this to maybe times we've experienced grief
Mhm.
in our own our own lives. Um, and I think one of the biggest experiences of grief that I had when I lost my dad was, okay, I'm just gonna like compartmentalize this. And I remember because I got the call and I was like at a dance thing. And I was like, I'm just gonna keep doing this dance thing right now. And I'm actually just not even gonna address this like at all for a little bit. And it was just this weird moment of like, I am just gonna kind of separate my brain into two right now. And one
Mhm.
half of it, I'm gonna just lock it up for a second. I'm gonna deal with that later. And my denial came in the form of like, I'm just going to do things like I normally do because I can't really do anything else at this point. So I'm curious, what about you, if you're comfortable sharing or if you have any
Yeah.
other experiences of like that element of denial?
I'm gonna start by just, like, pointing at the game, which is to say nothing about the exterior of this character changes. Like, she has the blue hair at the beginning of the game. When she
Mm-hmm.
lands, the only color in the world is her blue hair still.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is something in this denial period and just grief in general that is so internal to us. And when you look at Gris the character,
Oh.
she visually doesn't really change. Like, she'll get new powers, of course, and things like classic video game stuff as you move through, but like visually it's the same general design for the character, but the world itself changes to
Mm-hmm.
reflect her inner state, which is like the classic, like we've talked about before, the Men in Black 2, the
Right.
like it's raining because you cry, like that kind of thing. um so for me, it is I have had a very blessed, fortunate, lucky life when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
like people that I have lost. Like, I haven't lost many people. That said, I recently, in the last like month and a half, have learned that one of my friends took her own life, committed suicide, and it really hit me when I found out about it. And I remember I got a call 10 minutes before my first morning meeting, and it was a former coworker calling me up to let me know this had happened. And I was like, 100%, I cannot think about this. I have a 9 o'clock meeting. I can't move and I have to be there for, and I can't feel this right now. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, that is the part of denial that, like, I think a lot of times, especially younger Joel thought when he heard about denial, it was, I'm just not going to accept that this has happened. And I think there's an element of truth to that. But I also think part of it is denying yourself the ability
Mm-hmm.
to even engage with it
Yep.
until like you've gotten to a point where it's like, okay, I can allow myself to feel. I can allow myself to deal with this to a
Mm-hmm.
degree. And I think that to me is the more true experience of denial that I have.
Mm-hmm.
And God, I remember okay, we're not gonna do bummers in this, but just to say that like I remember my pup pass last year, like having moments of denial leading up to it happening. Like
Mm.
that I saw the train coming, knew it was about to go down, and I was just like, I'm not going to deal, not gonna feel it, going to just move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And after things happen that are going to happen, that's when I will like allow myself
Mm-hmm.
to engage emotionally. So I think that to me, that is something that is just well illustrated here. The like, yeah, on the outside, she can't sing. Like that's an activity she can't really do. She can't really jump yet. She can't really walk on her own yet. But nothing about her physical appearance would make you know or let you be clued into the fact that something catastrophic has happened to her. And that was something that I just very deeply felt.
Mm. Yeah, and I think the element of for the first like bit of the game, maybe the first minute, you can't really walk, you can't really jump, you
Hmm.
can't do those things. But after that, the rest of the gray area, again, you're still able to move, you're still able to progress, you're still able to like do things. So it seems like maybe she's fine and the world's just broken. It's
Oh,
like there's that element
no,
of
yes.
um yeah, that I think again, you said it really well already, so I won't repeat it, but it captures that really, really well. The ability to deny not simply by thinking it didn't happen, but by uh, just moving forward without acknowledging what happened.
Jenny, I'm fine, but the world is broken is the most brilliant thought about this game. Oh my god, that is good. Wow. I'm gonna have to let that marinate and simmer for a while because there is some richness there that is gonna take me some time to
Yeah.
process. But wow, world is broken. As a player, I think we can't even tell the difference yet.
Mhm.
Like as she's moving around, like one of the things this game does so well is play with composition. So not
Mhm.
just the colors, not just the mechanics, but like sometimes the camera is so zoomed in on this character that she takes up almost the entire screen.
Yep.
And sometimes the composition pulls so far back that you're seeing
Mm.
just how small she is in comparison to the entire world around her.
Right.
And that too feels like a commentary on what grief feels like, that sometimes you get so zoomed in on things that like
Mhm.
looking beyond yourself in this moment feels absolutely impossible. And sometimes you are so zoomed out that the weight of the world and all the things within it make it impossible to even see yourself and deal with the
Yeah.
things that you're dealing with. And this game plays with that brilliantly.
Mhm.
Ooh, boy.
It's so good. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm
I
curious. Oh,
Good.
go ahead.
I have what might be a little for those of you who are not in our Discord, what you are going to be missing out on is the artwork that comes in the art book for Gris. And one of the things that I started noticing as I was going through the concept art, and I started noticing in this opening gray section, is how much you see yourself in this world. So, for example, in the gray section, there are these little, almost like birds that are flying behind you, like a flock of birds.
Mhm.
Um, but what they kind of look like is if you shrunk down the Gris character, got rid of the blue hair, and had
Yeah.
her moving horizontally, like so that imagine her head was turned sideways and she was flying left to right.
Yeah.
It almost looks like that. And so this is one of the things that I think is definitely something we should all be looking for as we play this game is like,
Mhm.
what is the like evolution, if that makes, maybe that's the right word, like Pokemon evolution
Yeah.
of of the like Gris type character. Is everything a reflection of the Gris type character, or
Mhm.
is that not what's going on? Like at some point, would she become one of these statues? Like there's so many interesting layers that you don't get direct answers for, but like I would love as a community if you're like think like notice that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Notice the creatures, notice the things that are similar to the Gris character and the things that feel like alien or completely different, because
Mhm.
I just can't put my finger on it yet, but I feel like there's something to it. So
Yes.
I don't know if there's anything that you noticed that were like, oh, that thing kind of reminds me of the character a little bit. Did anything pop for you like that?
I don't think in this section, other than the bird-like critters, that
Okay.
were flying around. I'm trying to think. Um, yeah, I don't think there's anything else that I would highlight, but I do think that's a really great shout, and that we should keep looking out for, especially like the Gris shaped or sort of Gris symbolic adjacent imagery in this game, because it will be there, I'm sure.
I was just looking at my notes and I have in big letters, why is the world broken? And your question about like what is actually broken is like just blowing my mind right now. So well
In
done.
sync. Um, Now, what I'm curious about too that we haven't talked about, and
Mm,
maybe this is just more of a mechanical video gamey element that's brought into the game. I'm curious if you think there's anything more to it, and that is the constellations.
that
Um,
was the next thing on my list too.
Yes, same wavelength. Because as you're exploring this desolate, very bleak landscape, you stumble upon this sort of floating star. You can collect it, and these stars throughout the game, you'll collect them and create these constellations
Mm.
that help you move throughout these areas. I'm really curious on your thoughts about these.
Oh boy, I was gonna
Uh,
ask you about your thoughts on this, Jenny.
what?
I um I did not the first time I played through, I thought about it purely in mechanical terms.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, this is just the thing that you find that builds little bridges in the sky so that you can make it to places that otherwise you couldn't make it to. But
Right.
that's not fun, and that's not the Geeks and Grounds way.
And this is a symbolic game, so everything has extra meaning into it. That's what I feel
Yeah,
like. Like this
we're
game
gonna.
is totally symbolic, so everything will have a meaning.
Nothing is outside of the text. Um, Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so let's hypothesize some things.
Hmm.
One of the things that came to me was um, that you don't find the first constellation until you hit a roadblock that like you literally cannot go anywhere else. Like you can
Yeah.
explore all around it, but there's nowhere else to go until you encounter these little constellation lights and until they
Hmm.
make a bridge for you to get to the next section. And what struck me first is how external to you they are, that these are not coming from you or your innate powers or skill sets, that this is
Hmm.
just like, no, you stumbled upon a little light. That light's going to swirl around you until you find another light, and those two lights are then going to work together to build a bridge.
Yep.
And so here's my current hypothesis. And so the thing that I'm going to be looking out for is maybe are they somehow symbolic or representative of the external things in our lives that help us move forward through our grief?
Hmm.
So I don't know. That's what I'm toying with right now. How about you? What you got? Any fun theories about this?
That's pretty much what I was thinking too.
Oh,
Yeah, I was thinking because again, mechanically they do serve as the things that propel you forward in the level.
hmm.
And that yeah, I don't really know what to add to that other than I think these are the little bits of information and people and the things that we draw in that sometimes don't help us immediately with our grief too. I think there's a timeliness
Oh,
element
that's
to
good.
it where sometimes we have maybe words that we've gotten from someone if we're going through a really tough time and we can't apply that knowledge or apply that learning to our situation until a little bit later. I think especially as a teacher, that's something I thought about a lot is
Mm.
where like you're working with kids or if you work with any groups of people, if you work or if you have friends, I don't know, if you just live in society, oftentimes when I was teaching, I found that I would give my kids these little bits of knowledge that I'm like, I'm really hoping that this is something that you get now. But in the back of my head, understanding this is probably something that if they remember it, probably won't be applied until many years from now when they're
Mm.
like, oh, actually, I remember, hopefully they remember in eighth grade, Mrs. Wyndham told me this. And I think it's kind of like that, where oftentimes as we're moving through stages of our life, we collect information that we don't use until the right opportunity and context comes up. And then we're able to connect the dots, like literally in the game.
That's very good. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm. So I'm trying to think. I think you do find your first like almost like animal carving in this. The turtle was that in the gray section?
Um, I don't remember, and I didn't write the turtle down. So
Okay.
maybe let's touch on it just in case.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
here what we'll just say is like throughout the game, you're going to be finding these like almost like cave paintings or
Right.
drawings around that have animals in them. And one of the things that I'm very curious about is the role of animals in this game. In the same way, I'm curious about like
Mm-hmm.
the evolution of the Gris like being
Mm-hmm.
through the game. It just feels like there's something deeper here that there are weird little guys all throughout this game. They're
Mm-hmm.
weird little guys. And then sometimes there are animals. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a turtle just carved on this wall, like a real looking human, like earth looking turtle. And it is just it's almost uh, an image out of place. And so one of the
Mm-hmm.
things I'm just curious about is like what is the meaning of this? Like why did they choose to use images from um recognizable creatures in a game that is otherwise so fantastical and so different than anything that
Mm-hmm.
we have on Earth, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. So I don't know. There's something maybe for the community to look out for too. Like what's going on with the animals? Why are we
Yeah.
seeing these?
Yeah, I love it. One of the questions that we asked in the newsletter this week, sort of the reflection question for the community, was on just any other game experiences that you've had that address grief, whether or not you feel like they were effective versus not.
Mm,
And I'm curious if you had any that, as we're playing Gris, that maybe you found yourself like thinking back to, especially maybe comparing and contrasting. We love a good compare and contrast.
mm,
Um,
mhm.
yeah, any games come to mind?
I only have one, and
Mhm.
it is The Last of Us. I
Mm.
think the story of grief and reconciling with the loss of his daughter for the character Joel,
Mhm.
um, in the opening scene of The Last of Us, I think it is a theme that is obviously there, and people talk about it, but they don't. I don't think it gets as much time in the sun as it maybe could have because there's
Right.
so many important themes in that story. So I
Mhm.
understand it, but it's something that's like I think it informs so much of Joel's character decisions,
Mhm.
and um, people will say like, well, he looks at Ellie as like his daughter. It's like, okay, sure, absolutely, I don't disagree with that at all. But I feel like there's something about his grief in that story that maybe gets a bit underplayed. Like, I don't know. So for me, that's the game that comes to mind that I can think of that's like
Mm.
directly hitting on this theme that I think feels connected.
Yeah, what was really interesting to me as I was reflecting on any other game that dealt with grief is I realized, and this is something I think mirrored in a lot of the comments we got in the Discord server, was how little our entertainment, at least in games, from my knowledge, and maybe there's games out there that do that I have not played, but it seems like we don't really address grief in its entirety or as a process in games. Oftentimes in games,
Ooh,
there are traumatic events and they're inciting, and a lot of the times they're the cause for action. And we go through the action and we finish the game. And I'm like, wait, but there was a lot that these characters just went through. What next? Like, what's going to happen to them? And in reflecting on, hey, what are some games that do make me think about grief or have gotten me to think about grief more meaningfully? Because I think our culture doesn't really process and allow time for grief. Is
mm,
I found that that was reflected in a lot. Like, I found very few games that I felt like truly tried to explore grief versus just using trauma as an inciting event, which was a really just interesting point of note in my reflection.
that
Um,
is interesting. The
yeah,
difference between trauma as a catalyst for a story and character growth through the stages or experiences of grief.
right.
That is I have not really thought about that. That's
Yeah.
another man, you're just on fire
Wow.
tonight,
Yeah.
Jenny.
But just to answer my own question, I think A Mortician's Tale is a game that I thought of. While it doesn't necessarily address grief for the main character, it's been a few years since I've played, so maybe it does. But what I appreciated is it actually addresses the grief process because you
Mm,
play a mortician who prepares bodies for funeral services, and so it's a very, I think their tagline or some of their marketing material says, like, we're a death positive game. We're trying to create space for people to think about death and
mm,
funerals and grief. And I thought that was just a really wonderful little experience. It's very short. So I think if you're up for it and wanting to play, and if you're down for another experience of grief, that's a great supplementary game to play this month.
mm.
I'll link it in the newsletter this week. Um, I also thought of a game called That Dragon Cancer, which more was a meta grieving process and product that the parents of this young child who had cancer, they created this game to help themselves process their grief. And so
Wow.
while the game itself is more of this it's a narrative game about sort of the process of figuring out their kid has cancer and going through the process of like dealing with that. Um, the creation of this game itself was a work through grief that I thought was really fascinating. And
Hmm.
I'll link the NPR. I think they did this interview, or there's an NPR radio segment that I'll find and link, because I thought it was also really interesting to think about games, the creation of games, as a process of grieving as well.
Yeah.
Um, Lots of folks in the community mentioned Spiritfarer, which I have not yet finished because it made me cry too much.
I haven't played this. Is this a game I need to add to the list?
I think you should. I think this is a game that I contemplated doing it like instead of, or maybe in conjunction with Gris. I think I want to leave it open if people want to play it again as a supplementary game to bring in additional
Hmm.
experiences and thoughts around grief, since that's kind of what we're talking about this month. Please do so, because I think it's great material to bring in, but it is intense. Like, the
Oh,
premise
okay.
is you are kind of like Charon, like guiding spirits to the
Oh,
afterlife.
Spiritfarer, of course.
Yeah, and so it's beautifully done, but also, sort of with each character, you're going to be saying goodbye, and there's a lot of emotion tied to that. And each
Oh.
character has their own sort of reconciliation that they have to go through with their living self in their past life before they move. And so I think there's a lot of like emotionally charged material in there. So if you're like, that's not me this month, I also completely understand. But yeah.
Hmm. You know what's interesting? I feel like the story that American storytellers, especially, are comfortable with is the story of a guy, usually, that is locked in one of his stages of grief.
Mm-hmm.
This is a story that I think Americans love. That is, I have this guy and something has happened. He's grieving it, but he's just locked in like the anger phase. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have this, we're going to have be because of that, we get to have this story of revenge or whatever. And at the end, after he's killed the final bad guy or whatever the thing happens to be, that's when we're going to get this like beautiful sunrise over New York City, and we're going to believe that everything's going to be all right.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just so it's so American. It's so white American, especially, like that we cannot engage with grief as a full experience and a natural part of our lives. We can't
Mm-hmm.
deal with grief as something that we come in and out of. That isn't just like a linear line, but is like it is a
Mm-hmm.
constellation where lines are constantly connecting in and out, back and forth to each other.
Yeah.
It is I'm glad that you've asked this question about where in media we see it. I'd love to hear people just thoughts like video games, books, movies, TV
Mm-hmm.
shows that are dealing with this topic. I would love to know what you guys see as like maybe with for your opinion, what is something that you think addresses grief more holistically or more
Mm-hmm.
completely? I think that's something that oh, you know what movie I think does an excellent job with this is Arrival. The kind of sci-fi movie. I think you're dealing with a character that's experiencing a lot of grief. You get this like the forward and backwards
Mm.
experiences there, and like I don't know, there's something about that now that I'm thinking about it, I think is one of the very few that I can think of stories in modern media that is telling a story of a person working through grief and like all of its various stages,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes repeatedly.
Yeah. I have not seen it, so I'll have to like add that into my readings and watchings for the week, or the month, I guess. Yeah, it is tough, because I think at least in Western media, I cannot think of really any at this point in time. And I've spent most of this week, because that was the reflection question this week. And I was like, okay, well, I've got some games that I think kind of address grief. And I don't know if I know of any movies or books that I feel like for me have really
Mm,
approached and addressed, like, I think just the nuances of grief. I think your point of how it's not a linear process is one that I very strongly agree with. And I
mhm,
think if there was a weakness, I suppose, in this game, in Gris, is that it does show grief as a very linear process due to the nature of just what it is in terms of games and being the levels and all of that. And I think if I had like my one critique of like, oh, I wish they could have illustrated this other element, I would have wished it not to be as linear personally, because that's just not how I've experienced grief. Um,
That is
yeah.
interesting. We should keep an eye on this because I
Yeah.
think as we get deeper into the game, I'm going to talk about how I think they attempt to do this. Like,
Hmm.
to your point, though, it is definitely linear. It's
Yeah.
like each you find a statue and you find the next statue. So, like,
Yeah.
definitely there. Um, I think one of the things that would be an interesting thing for us to critique is how we think they might be trying to do this and
Hmm.
whether or not they're successful,
Yeah.
or if we can think of a way that could have been more successful for them to
Yeah.
have done it.
Yeah. I agree. I think, I mean, I guess I kind of spoiled myself in that I feel like maybe I didn't think it was such a successful thing, but
No, I think that's fine.
personally,
That's
but
actually a great
yeah.
thing. It's a good starting point because like I have some ideas, but I'm going to start off with the same perspective. I think that it's
Hmm.
a very linear story and they don't do a great job with it,
Hmm.
with that particular element of it. So I
Yeah.
think like let's keep our eyes out on that. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah. I guess, is there anything else, I was like, it's such a short section. It really is only like the first, I mean, I think I put in the playthrough guide it was like 30 minutes, but really it's not even that. If you're
No,
going through the
it's not.
game. It's like maybe 10, honestly. That's if you're going through slowly. But anything in this first stage of denial. I guess we didn't talk about how the stage ends, because I think
Oh,
that's a
please.
really it sets us up for the sort of the patterns that we're going to see later, and I think it's really it's a beautiful moment,
Mm-hmm.
just visually. So at the very end of this gray area, you see the hand once again.
Mm-hmm.
Gris steps into the hand, and it lifts up, and we see sort of a almost like a replay of that first image we saw with her trying to sing. She sort of levitates, and color bursts from sort of within and beyond her. And that color is a fiery red.
Red.
And so that illustrates to us that we are now moving into this next section. We see like the sort of smaller grisbirds kind of soaring through
Gris
the
birds.
sky. They have the same like sort of cape, but their capes now are wings. I don't really know what to call them. They are red. And I think what's really, really fascinating, because I went a little bit ahead just to make sure the game would save, because I wasn't sure where the stage
Mm-hmm.
would save. But as you get into this next stage, you climb a huge set of stairs. It like seems like it goes forever. You're going up and up and up, and then you slide all the way back down, and it gets just deeper red, and you are embedded thoroughly into stage 2 of the game, um, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was really, really, really visually interesting. And again, symbolic. We're going to say that a lot this month. They use symbolism a lot in
Mm-hmm.
this game.
Mm-hmm. So you're playing through the red section for this next week. Are they
Red,
stopping at the end of red?
no, so this week, if you're wanting again to go in the stages that we're discussing, you're going to play through red and green, which is anger and what? I feel like it starts with a D as well.
Bargaining.
Bargaining, sorry, B. Yeah, anger and bargaining. So you
Yeah.
have red and green as the stages that you're going to complete. Um, and you'll know you finished it, because the color is going to be very different from red or green. So there's that. That's when you know you've gotten to the spot. But again, this is a game where I feel like so many of the others we've played, it's short enough where if you feel like you're emotionally invested, you're involved, um, don't don't mess up your own pacing. Like,
Yeah,
play. If you're feeling excited and compelled, just play however you want to.
absolutely. And while we're encouraging you to do specific things, maybe you also are going to be playing a long game this week this month in addition to your short game. And for a comparison, maybe you just need to have two beverages, one that's like a long sipping beverage and one that's a short chugging beverage. So crack your Mountain Dew,
Oh God.
open up your hot tea, have them side by side, be a little beverage goblin with us as we go through our long game and short game throughout March.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.